just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Janet Geddes. I am the business owner and founder at Avid Bookshop in Athens, Georgia. I don't usually note this in my introduction, but since we're talking about UGA football, I will let you know that I am a very proud alumna of UGA. Got my master's degree here in 2006. I moved to Athens thinking I'd live here temporarily, and it's now 2020, and I've been here the whole time, and I love it. I opened my bookstore in 2011, and we have had the pleasure of working with all sorts of authors, but it is not too common that we have the tremendous opportunity to welcome an author who has written a book that is so completely Athens and UGA focused. We are super excited to have Seth here tonight. Before I introduce him and his In Conversation partner, we do have a couple of things to get out of the way. First of all, I wanted to let you all know that once we start the event, my screen and microphone will go off. And as one way that you can kind of make sure that you're watching the Seth and Daniel TV show, if you'll follow with me, if you hover over any grayed out rectangle that has somebody's name on it, so I'm hovering over the name Nate. If you look at that user's window, you'll see a little gray rectangle. And when you hover over that with your mouse, in the upper right-hand corner of that rectangle, you'll see a little blue square with 3 dots in it. If you click that little square just one time, you'll see a drop-down menu appear, and it will say chat or hide non-video participants. If you hide non-video participants by clicking once, all of a sudden the only people that you will see participating are our featured guests, which is pretty exciting and makes it more like a real event. I also want to let you know that we have the chat window open, and we highly encourage you to ask questions of the author, Seth Emerson. He is here sharing his time and talent with us. So this is a unique and fun opportunity, I think he's talented, for us to engage with him and ask him questions about UGA football and Kirby Smart. We do require that you are respectful and kind to each other. I don't anticipate any hateful language, but if we have anybody who is breaking our rules, you will be immediately removed from the Zoom. So let's just stay polite and kind. Please keep yourself muted. I think everybody's muted, and your video off. You have all been muted and your video has been turned off by default. If you accidentally unmute yourself, please just remute, and that way we can keep the attention on our featured guests. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you the author and the In Conversation partner. So I'll first kick off with describing who has volunteered his time tonight to be in conversation with Seth, and that is Daniel Shirley. Daniel Shirley is the managing editor for The Athletic Atlanta. He has previously worked at newspapers in Anderson, South Carolina, Valdosta, Albany, and Macon, and he served as a sports editor in Albany and Macon for a combined 18 years before a short stint at Dog Nation SEC Country. He and Seth have gone way back and have a lot of conversations about sports over time, including some Facebook Lives they were just telling me about. So I'm looking forward to hearing their dynamic. And then the star of the show, of course, is Seth Emerson. He has written Attack the Day, Kirby Smart, and Georgia's Return to Glory. For those of you who already bought a copy of the book, that's awesome. We know that this is going to be a really, really great gift book for anybody you know who loves football even half as much as you do. So we encourage you after the event to navigate back to our site and buy either an extra copy or buy some, and we can mail them to your friends near and far, and they'd be really delighted to get this. And that way you'll be supporting Seth, you'll be supporting his journalism career, and you'll be supporting the hometown bookshop here at UGA, which is run by UGA alumna. All right, so Seth Emerson is a staff writer for The Athletic Atlanta. He covers Georgia football and athletics. He has written previously for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and the Albany Herald. He is very well respected, and I got several messages from friends of mine around Georgia who were super excited that we booked an event for him. So without further ado, Daniel and Seth, you guys can take it away, and we'll see you at 7:55.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, Seth, what I first wanted to know was kind of walk us through the process of how you got the book started and what made you want to do this book.
Well, I think everyone wants to write a book, right? And
yep.
Daniel, you've written a couple. We should also say we'll plug those later.
Right, a little bit later.
Plug those later, but the people at Triumph Books came to me, and it was after the 2017 season, which obviously figures prominently in this book. It was actually kind of early in the 2018 season, and they were interested in doing a book and turning it around for this time last year, for 2019. That wasn't going to work for a number of reasons, but they agreed that 2020 would be a good time too. So we decided to do that, and we went into it. And I wanted to do, and Triumph Books was on board with this, something more than just kind of a cookie cutter book or like a rehash of my game stories or things that had already been written before. I wanted this to be new. So what I did was I went back and I interviewed former players, former staffers, coaches, people that were on those teams, and went through 2015, 2016, 2017, which were the key parts of this story. This is not a biography of Kirby Smart. This is not a all-encompassing story about Georgia football. It's about a critical period in Georgia football history. It has a lot of background on Kirby Smart. Obviously, has a lot of background on Georgia's program, but I really wanted to center on 2015, 16, and 17. Well, we get 18 and 19 in there. But 2015 is such a critical year because it's the end of the Mark Richt era, and it's what leads to Georgia hiring Kirby Smart. 2016 is a key year because even though Georgia doesn't do very well, Kirby Smart instills his system and lays the groundwork for what's to come. And then obviously 2017, for anybody who's been through it, was just a magical year to be around. And the players I spoke to for this book, the staff members, recount that journey, that year in ways that I hope that I reflect in the book are just pretty, it's their voice. This is not me as the Georgia beat writer during this period talking about my own memories, my own remembrances. There's a couple kind of behind the scenes things involving me and Kirby and other beat writers, but this is not that. This is a story about a critical period in Georgia history, starting with the bad and then going to the good. And yeah, the painful, the 2017 national championship game. But even there, I think there's things that are entertaining and illuminating. I know I'm being long-winded here, but there were things that I, as the beat writer who's chronicled this whole thing every day, there were things that guys told me for this book that I didn't know. And so I learned a lot. And I learned a lot about how Kirby Smart runs his program and what makes it tick. And I hope that that's reflected in the book and people learn that by reading the book.
That's an interesting part of it. I think you mentioned there is, I think some people think just because we cover these teams and we're around them all the time that everything that has gone on. Was there something that you learned that you went, oh, wow, I didn't know that? And I mean, like you mentioned, I did a book. I had a moment like that in one of my books where I went, I had no idea that had happened. And it just really kind of startled me. Was there something like that in this one for you?
There's a few anecdotes, and you can ask me about those because Daniel and I did our prep. There are a few anecdotes I want you to bring up, and I'll talk about them. That they're in the book. But there's a few things that I remember when I was talking to the people for it when they were recounting the stories. I said, "Oh man, that's gold." I did not know that, and that's going in the book. I think one of my takeaways was that 2016 was so important. That's the year that we all skip over. We all want to talk about 2015 and everyone wants to know all the bad stuff that happened behind the scenes, which I think a lot of it kind of gets blown out of proportion.
Yeah.
We all know about 2017, but there was stuff that I learned about 2015 and 17 that I didn't know. But what I learned about 2016 was just that Kirby Smart and his staff were so consistent. They did the same thing after losing at home to Vanderbilt and losing at home to Georgia Tech that they did after beating Auburn. But I don't want to dwell on 2016 because it's kind of the more boring story in the long run, but I think it's critical. And I think one of the big takeaways also is that month of December 2016, the bridge from kind of the 2016 Kirby's first year to the second year was so crucial. That laid the groundwork. Those four guys coming back, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, Davin Bellamy, Lorenzo Carter, kind of showed a buy-in to Kirby Smart and the program as in guys that were there and had gone through this. They were Mark Richt holdovers. They were Kirby Smart. They were with Kirby for a year. They said, we could have gone pro, but we're not going to. We believe in what's happening here. And that decision, you can't underestimate it. That was, I think, the key moment for Kirby Smart.
Well, we'll talk about them a little bit later. Let's talk about the bad in 2015 first, and let's go chronologically, and let's talk about the bad first and get it out of the way, right? You were there, you covered all of it.
Yeah.
I always, just from talking to you, you and I have worked together, but I wasn't there, so I wasn't in the day-to-day minutia of all of it. It was kind of blown out of proportion. I know there was some bad, and it might have just been time for a change, right?
There are rumors that, like, look, if you're looking for me to empty my soul of all the rumors and put them in this book, that's not going to happen, because that's not what I do. Right. But I think the truth is interesting enough. I start out that chapter in the 2015 season with a player, Jeb Blazevich, talking about that there were days that they weren't sure they were going to be able to practice because they knew the coaches were warring with each other.
Wow.
What exactly was going on with the coaches, how they were warring. I mean, look, there were obviously factions on that staff. Mark Richt was kind of at the top trying to hold it together. You had Jeremy Pruitt and his Alabama people like Kevin Scherer, the strength coach Mark Hockey, who we can get to in a little bit. But the Alabama kind of clique, you had the Mark Richt loyalist clique that was like Thomas Brown, a little bit Brian McClendon. You had guys that are just trying to keep their head down, which was like John Lilly was one of them, Rob Sale, the O-line coach, who actually was part of the Alabama group, and then Brian Schottenheimer and Mike Eckler was a little bit in the Mark Richt loyalist camp, but he was, he had a pretty live wire personality, and he was at it with people too. And then all along, you also have Schottenheimer, who is bringing this offense in that is way too complicated for the players. That was the takeaway from talking to players, was that why did it not work in 2015? Dude had been in the NFL for 11, 12 years and had kind of forgotten that you can't just expect college kids 18 to 21, 22 years old to pick up the offense like that. And that was a big part of it. And the Mark Hockey was the strength coach, and people kind of overlook him. But something I was told, and this is in the book, is that players didn't have much confidence in him. He was brought in from Alabama on Jeremy Pruitt's recommendation. He had been the assistant strength coach at Alabama under Scott Cochran, who was the secret sauce for Nick Saban during his time there. Well, Hockey had been there for a couple years at Alabama, but he was not Scott Cochran. He had his own way, and in the words of Jeb Blazevich, he didn't know what he was doing. Wow. He may now, but he didn't then, and things just got off on the wrong foot. The off season did not go well for the new strength staff and the offense. The defense not too great either, but the defense was just so talented and everything that they were able to manage. But then you throw in Brian Schottenheimer's offensive foibles, and then the coaches start being at war with each other, these little cliques. And yeah, I mean, there's that season became rumor central for stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that, and I'm not going to share the rumors, but people who are Georgia fans, I'm sure, have heard them. Look, if I'd been able to confirm them, they'd be in the book. I didn't confirm them because I don't think a lot of them are true. But the truth is interesting in itself. And what it did was it set up the Kirby Smart era, because Kirby Smart from Alabama was able to come in and with a little bit of a softer edge than Jeremy Pruitt and Mark Hockey and company was able to install that Nick Saban Alabama way. Yeah, and it certainly has worked. Well, let's talk about that month of December and those four guys and just what they meant to that team. You and I were working for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that year when Georgia went through that run. I joined a little bit later, but what that group meant to that team. Has there ever been a more important group of players in Georgia history? There have been better players. I mean, come on. But a more important group as far as buying in, like you said, and meaning so much to that program. So two of the central figures in the book, and I talked to a lot of players for the book. a few off the top of my head that I name: Jonathan Ledbetter, Aaron Davis, a few other guys, and just obviously stories from the beat. But two central guys in the book are Jeb Blazevich and Davin Bellamy. And Davin was one of those four that came back. And Kirby Smart holds this press conference where he springs it on the media. All four of these guys are coming back. Jeb told me that their teammates didn't know that that press conference was happening until it happened. But that it sent this big message to everyone that, look, and Jeb said this as someone who's going to be a rising senior but he knew realistically it wasn't a candidate to go pro. But it just sent this message that these guys are passing up a lot of money. Now, look, if Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and Carter and Bellamy were surefire, like high first round picks, they would have gone. So part of it was also that they weren't. But Sony Michel ended up being a first round pick. Yep. Nick Chubb ended up being almost a first round pick, and Carter was third round pick. So they did give up something, but they sent a message that they believed in what Kirby was doing, despite the team at that point being 7-5 and coming off a loss at home to Georgia Tech in a year that they lost at home to Vanderbilt. And everyone's going around going, why did we fire Mark Richt for this? Yeah. These four were guys that were on the inside and said that we think things are going in a good direction. And lo and behold, they go beat TCU in the Liberty Bowl. And it was just the Liberty Bowl, but TCU's a decent program, and they beat TCU, and that was the springboard to the 2017 season that was so magical. And one of the other things that was interesting that Davin told me was that this was not a decision that those four guys made in concert. Really? They didn't get together and say, we're all going to do this. They made it independently. Like Nick and Sony made it independently. Like as close as they were, like Nick and Davin were both ready to turn pro at different points, but then changed their minds. Sony was one who was a little more on the fence, and Lorenzo was probably the one who was the most eager to return all along. But the four of them independently decided to come back. Like Davin said that he told Kirby he was coming back before he told any of the players.
It's interesting because
he told him that at practice, like as a by the way, like
did he really?
By him and said, all right, I'm coming back. And Kirby's like, all right. And that was it.
That's interesting because I would imagine a lot of people just assumed they all got together because they were close and made the decision.
Because they had this big press conference announcing it. But before they went together into the press conference was the first time the four had been together to talk about it.
Before we move on, we've got a question. It says, how much access did you have to Kirby when writing the book? And if so, was he enthusiastic about participating?
So number one, I've had a front row seat to the entire Kirby Smart era. So, and I've got a couple stories in there of just kind of interactions that, are away from that. But I talked to Kirby, and he didn't want to like sit down and bare his soul yet on this.
Right.
Number one, it's not a biography of him anyway. So it's not something that like needs him. But he said, look, if I write my own biography someday, autobiography, I want to, hold these stories for me. I'm like, I totally respect
Makes sense. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And by the way, because of Kirby's media policies, we get Kirby a lot.
Yes.
We get him like 2 or 3 times a week. So he wasn't, it would have added to the book, sure. But he knew, like when I signed the book, or when I signed the deal to do the book, actually, I think even before I signed it, I talked to Claude Felton and I said, look, I'm going to be doing a book. I don't want this to be a surprise. And I want you to tell Kirby, and I want you to tell people in the building that need to know. And so they've known all along about it, and they've been helpful when I've asked questions. Claude helped me reach a lot of these players and staffers. Kirby hasn't told anybody not to talk to me. And, I think it's been going. I don't know what Kirby's reaction to the book is. I gave him, along with his dad and some other people, advanced copies, but Kirby's had some other stuff going on. So
yeah, he's been a little busy, right?
If he hasn't read the book yet, but if he's been told anything about anything that's in it, he hasn't reached out to express anger in it yet.
Well, there's nothing probably it's not a gotcha book anyway. It's not anything that you're trying to spring on people. Like you said, that's not what you do. So, so as we move on to after that group deciding to come back, and they have that magical season the next year. Is there what jumps out at you? I mean, I remember the Rose Bowl night. Everybody remembers the Notre Dame game and winning that game and what that meant. Anything else? Any other stories in there from that season where people are going to be really looking forward to read that?
Oh, I mean, I try to paint a chronological narrative of that season so that you feel like you're reliving it and remembering. Let's remember the context. Georgia's coming off an 8-5 year.
Yep.
And we look back on that Georgia Notre Dame game, which was the second game of the season. And we think, number one, about Georgia taking over the stadium. Yep. But number two, we think of it as this like seminal game that the whole country was watching, which is kind of true, but it matched a team that was 8-5 the previous year versus one that was 4-8 in Notre Dame. And Georgia wins this like back and forth game where Davin Bellamy makes the sack and Lorenzo Carter recovers the fumble at the end. And Davin recounts that moment. And just like he said, the everything goes quiet. And then he just hears the reaction because it happened on that side of the field where most of the Georgia fans were. And so to hear the Georgia reaction, I was actually on the sideline. I remember that. And I just remember the reaction of the players on the sideline to that. But that game was big, but talking to people, you sometimes forget about the Mississippi State game, which came, I think it was week 4. It was either week 4 or week 5. And that was the game that really opened a lot of people's eyes to, around the program at least, of, oh, this might be a special year. Because beating Notre Dame was good, but Notre Dame was coming off a 4-8 year. Mississippi State came in there unbeaten. They had the hype. Even Aaron Murray was prodigal son at Georgia, was picking Mississippi State to win, and Georgia won that game convincingly. They thumped them 31-3. And then we kind of go through that whole year and the buildup. And I don't want to drone on about everything about it, but one revelation from the book, Shane Beamer, who I talked to for a while for this book, he was the special teams coordinator, right, tight ends coach, told me that, all right, the Auburn game 10, Georgia gets blown out in Auburn, first loss of the year. And everyone thinks, well, there goes Georgia. They were pretenders. They weren't really that good. They get home and Kirby brings the staff together and says, I think we're going to see Auburn again in the SEC championship game in 2 weeks. I think they're going to beat, actually 3 weeks. I think they're going to beat Alabama and they're going to win the SEC West and we're going to play them again. So let's break down this film today while it's fresh rather than in 3 weeks when we're getting ready for the SEC championship game. So that's what the crew did. That's what the coaches and their huge staff did. And sure enough, they get Auburn in the SEC championship, and they leaned on that work they did when losing to Auburn was fresh. And a lot of stuff they came up with when they were going through that film of Auburn, like the next day and day after, allowed them to go back and have a better game plan and a game on both sides of the ball, on offense and defense, for the SEC championship. And they flipped it. And Georgia walloped Auburn 28-7.
Another question we've got is, do you have a different perspective of Kirby now than you did in 2016, just with his dealings with the media, I guess?
I think so. I mean, it'd be impossible not to. I don't want to get too much like into the media relationship with the coach. I think a lot of, in all due respect to Bernie, a lot of people, get a little turned off if we're like whining about media access and whatever.
Sure.
I think one thing I try to get through to people is that Kirby's different when he's up there. And now we're doing Zoom calls like this. I actually did a Zoom call with Kirby and the other media members at 6 right before we hopped on this. And, he's different in those settings than he is like in other settings. I mean, keep in mind, there's a reason he's a good recruiter. When he's up there speaking at these press conferences, he's speaking to his team, which is the same thing that Nick Saban does. I have in there in the book a story that was relayed to me by a mutual friend of ours named Gentry Estes.
Yep.
When he was covering Alabama, when he first started covering Alabama, he asked Nick Saban what he thought was just a, routine question, and Saban jumped all over. And Gentry's like, what was that about? Press conference ends, and Alabama PR guy comes to Gentry and says, hey, come back. So they bring him back to Saban's office, and Saban's having a salad and sits him down and says, I understood your question. It wasn't a bad question. I had to answer it the way it was, or the way I did, because I had to send a message to my team. And I think it had something to do about like the usual, like, how is this game different than others, blah, blah, blah. And so Saban wanted to send a message to his players through the media. And I think Kirby does that a lot too. I think a lot of coaches do that. But when you got Kirby to the side, he does stuff that is, look, he's a human being. I've got stuff. I've got stories in there from Jonathan Ledbetter. I think people are aware of the stuff that Ledbetter went through. I think it was Kirby's first year, 2016, where he had troubles off the field. He had 2 arrests. One was a kind of a silly arrest outside of a bar in downtown Athens, I think, for having a fake ID. But the second one was a fairly serious one. And so he had to go into treatment. And Ledbetter talked to me about the way Kirby handled it. And he said he didn't want to share some of the stuff that Kirby specifically told him to sympathize and identify with what he was going through. But he said, look, he hung with me in a way. And look, Kirby has the cutthroat side to him.
Yeah.
That helps him manage his roster, so to speak.
Yeah.
But he has the other side of him, just the humane side to him. And I'll just say that I've seen that part of it myself too. That it's not just all about X's and O's and cutthroat winning football games.
Yeah, I think a lot of these coaches have the hard edge in front of people, but then when they're around their players, these guys really care about these players and what's best for them. Actually, a question about the players from Nate says, which player or coach has been your favorite to interview and why?
Man, if we go through the years,
well, you wrote about one of your favorite players last year for The Athletic.
I did. Actually, earlier this year, Sean Williams, still playing for the Bengals, drafted in 2012. He was the guy who kind of saved that 2012 season by going off to us in the media about play these guys, not play these guys. Sean Williams has me blocked on Twitter. And I still don't know why. He's only the second famous former Georgia football player who has me blocked on Twitter. The first one now plays running back for the Falcons, and I don't know why either. Yeah. I choose to believe it's mistaken identity. But I loved Sean because he just was direct. He's got that South Georgia, much like, Mike Bobo and Kirby Smart. There's that. Daniel and I are always going to be like sympathetic to the South Georgia boys.
Yep.
Because we're, that's where we met. Like, for those unaware, Daniel worked in Valdosta, moved to Albany. You hired me in Albany, brought me from Washington, D.C. down to Georgia and exposed me to SEC football and Georgia football. But I tend to I tend to gravitate towards the South Georgia guys for that reason. They have a directness and a bluntness and honesty about them that I've always loved. Like I said, Bobo, Kirby is one of them. Sean Williams, I could name a lot of those guys.
You mentioned Gentry earlier. A lot of love for the Seth and Gentry show that you guys used to do.
I do. I see 2 comments on it from Nate and from Andre. Yeah, I wish we could bring it back. But.
A little behind the scenes for folks. When you and Gentry both worked for me, you guys butted heads all the time, and I had to finally tell you to knock it off.
we kind of hated each other.
Stop fighting all the time, and let's get to work. And no, that was a fun staff to.
And now, we hated each other. But that was 2002, like 2003, but like 17, 18 years later, like Gentry and I still talk 2 or 3 times.
Really good friends. Yeah. It's funny how that was. And I tell people that, and they'll ask me about you guys working together, and I say, well, they fought all the time, and no way, they're such good friends now. What happened? And it was just 2 guys who were very competitive, doing their jobs. There's a question in there from Andre about Justin Fields and Jake Fromm.
Right.
What's your take on that and kind of how it played out, and did it play out the way it should, I guess?
The thing, and the way I see Andre's question too, and I think he puts it pretty well, which is his contention is that it was always attire anything close, you'd see Jake Fromm be the starter because Kirby would not want to start a true freshman for the third straight season. Yes. And yeah, Andre has read the book. Thank you, Andre, because you point out in there that Kirby said something when Eason got hurt to start the 2017 season that said he gets into the locker room, Kirby does, after the Appalachian State game. Jacob Eason has sprained his MCL, as it turns out. They didn't know how serious it was going to be, but they knew at that point it wasn't an ACL, but that it was not going to be a come back the next week situation. Kirby kind of puts his head in his hands and goes, cannot believe I'm going to have to start a freshman again. He didn't want to go through it again. It was just it was something that was not fun. You kind of forget too that you go through an entire offseason of planning, thinking Jacob Eason's going to be your guy. He's a more experienced quarterback. You got the same offensive coordinators previous year. You're going to take this big step from year one to year two. They didn't want to start Jake Fromm. Then they did, and you just kind of, everyone knows what happened after that. And in the midst of that, they're recruiting Justin Fields because Kirby has just decided you cannot not recruit this great quarterback in our backyard.
Right.
To their credit, they get him, but they get him in October. But then Jake Fromm just keeps doing what he's doing. And obviously the story of the 2018 season was Fromm and Fields, and Fromm never played bad enough for them to make the decision to yank him. A lot of people choose to believe now, looking back, with the way 2019 went, with Fields playing the way he did and Fromm playing the way he did, that Kirby made the wrong decision and Georgia made the wrong decision and blew it. And it's easy to say that in hindsight, but those of us that were around at the time know that there was no decision to make. They couldn't just tell Jake Fromm to get lost, right, because we're going to start this guy who hasn't played it down for us. I think it also has a lot to do with the offense. I think history has kind of shown that Justin Fields was a better fit at Ohio State, and Fromm, not only was he a fit for Georgia's offense, Georgia was going to do more things that Fromm could do. And also Fromm had the support of the locker room. Like, Fromm had gone through that 2017 season, engendered a lot of respect in the locker room. Obviously, he's had some things come out since he left Georgia that have also tainted that too. But you can't forget what things were actually like in 2017 and 2018.
Yeah, and I mean, he played really well against Oklahoma and played very well against Alabama. They didn't lose the championship game because of him. You got an interesting note about Kirby and Secret Service officers before that championship game. Tell us a little bit about what this was
my favorite story, and I'm almost disappointed. I hear a lot of people. I've heard a lot of feedback about the book, good feedback, bad feedback in the sense that Herschel Walker's hometown, I know, is not Gainesville, it's Wrightsville. I don't know how that slipped through, but whatever. I'm sorry about that. But overwhelmingly, it's been good feedback. But no one talks about this story, which I think is the greatest story, but maybe it's just me. So Georgia's getting ready to play the national championship game against Alabama, January 8th, 2018. That was the day of the game. Walkthroughs are like the 6th and the 7th. So President Trump's going to come to the game.
Right.
So the Secret Service is going to Mercedes-Benz Stadium to do like their preparation, their own walkthrough. Kirby Smart tells the staff, or he tells somebody, that, look, when I was at Alabama and we went to the White House after winning national championships, there was a Secret Service officer who told us I was an Alabama fan. And so he introduced himself to us as an big Alabama fan and everything. So that was great then. But that means that someone at the Secret Service is an Alabama fan. We're about to play Alabama. So I think he wanted to find out whether this Alabama fan was going to be in the detail that was going to be going through at Mercedes-Benz Stadium to possibly be feeding information back to Nick Saban and company. But we see, as we saw as the game went, Georgia didn't need help in the first half. They needed help in the second half. And one of the other revelations that I think you're going to get to is that Jeb Blazevich told me that, all right, so setting the scene, everyone remembers what happened. Georgia is leading 13-0. Tua comes in, it's 13-7. Other interesting thing Beamer told me, I'm going to keep backtracking here, sorry. But
it's okay.
At halftime, Kirby comes into the locker room when Georgia's up 13-0. and says, Nick's going to put Tua in. And even Beamer was like,
really?
Like, true
Wow.
freshman? Like, Hurts has been the starter all year. They're not, I mean, is he that's going to be a panic move. And Kirby says, no, he's going to put in Tua. Get ready for that. They were right. Not much they could do, apparently. Tua gets him a touchdown. Fromm comes back, throws that beautiful 80-yarder to Cole Hardman to make it 20-7. At that point, I know a lot of Georgia fans think that Jim Chaney took his foot off the gas, allowing Alabama to come back. And Georgia players, in hindsight, agree that he did that.
Really?
Blazevich told me that Chaney called the same play 3 times in a row at one point. Like,
wow.
The first time was like, okay. The second time was like, we're running the same play. And then the third time, same play. And yeah, I mean, that is one of the – there's a lot of things that fans may say that you talk to people like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. That was one that people are right. They took their foot off the gas. So, and as Andre A points out, Tyler Simmons was onside.
Yes, he was.
I don't know that if I dwelled on that too much in the book. Everyone knows about that, but I still will never forget that the locker room after the game, going up to Tyler Simmons, and this is a very quiet locker room. I went up to Tyler and asked him about it, and he said, well, the ref said I was offside, so I must have been offsides. And it was clear to me that he hadn't seen a replay yet. All this stuff is like social media is blowing up with the replay showing he wasn't offsides, but he hadn't seen it. So I pulled out my phone and I showed it to him.
Yeah.
And so the first time Tyler Simmons saw a replay of the play was when I showed it to him in the locker room, and he just looks at me and he goes, he knew, I think he'd been media trained by Georgia enough to not say it, but he was thinking it. And
wow.
That was there's a lot of memories from that game, from that season that will stick with you for a while.
Yeah, we were both at that game. I was sitting up in the auxiliary press box at the top of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and I remember them bringing in Tua and thinking, this is a panic move. I mean, like you just said, that people were saying that, and then we all know what happens. Remember the throw that Jake Fromm made, and then obviously the second and 26. From my vantage point, you could see it coming. As soon as they snapped the ball, that the play was going to work and Alabama was going to win the title.
That's in the book too. Beamer didn't tell me this. Someone else told me this, but I, as a source, but I put it in the book that on the headset after Bellamy and Ledbetter bring down Tua for the sack, like right away, Kirby says they're going to go deep now.
Really?
In so many words.
Wow.
And so they got ready for it. They were in cover 2, and we all know what happened after that. There's a lot in this book, and I think I've recounted it with like the Auburn game, that Kirby doesn't just coach on like being a good recruiter and yelling at people.
Right.
I've got a good story about him yelling at Kevin Butler. Where Butler recounts being yelled at by Kirby for something. Kevin's like, what? Like, I didn't really do anything wrong. And like coming out of halftime about 15, 20 minutes later, Kirby goes up to him and says, Dicka never yelled at you like that, did he? He played for Dicka
right.
in Chicago. And so there, I do have to say that like, I came away from researching this book and talking to people with a lot more respect for Kirby. There's an obvious respect that people within the program have for him. Like, again, these were not interviews. These were interviews I sought out with people.
Right.
These were people who were no longer with the program, like purposefully. So they had an opportunity to say they didn't like something that Kirby did or this. And then there's people that, like what I just said about Jeb Blazevich, about Jim Chaney's play calling the national championship. But there's a lot of respect for him and I for Kirby and the way he runs this program. And I think that's a good sign for Georgia football for down the road.
Yeah, another good sign, a nice transition here from Julianne is about recruiting. What are they doing differently in recruiting, do you think, that has worked so well for them the last few years?
I have a chapter just about that. I think in retrospect, talking to a couple people, the 93K day in 2016 was a brilliant marketing idea. They came up with it and rolled with it. Like when Kirby went out there at a basketball game after he had just been hired and announced the 93K day. That wasn't just like, hey, I'm just going to say,
Right.
let's have 93K. And someone came up with the idea and said, like, hey, let's try this. And when they were able to pull it off, it impressed someone like DeAndre Swift said that being there, like, he's coming down from Philadelphia and there's 93,000 there for a spring game.
Yep.
It said it impressed the hell out of him. But then they took off from there, and there's a lot in there. I have like detail about stuff that Georgia does. And one thing that Kirby did was when he came in, there was a lot of this thought of, all right, Georgia's going to lock down its borders now. They're going to recruit the best players in Georgia, and they're going to get the best players in Georgia. That's all they have to do, because people had knocked Kirby Smart for doing that. I remember being in Macon at an event, and a fan stood up and said, why do we have all these Georgia boys playing at other schools?
Right.
Kirby's answer was the other way. He didn't say, we're locking down the state of Georgia. He said, basically, I've only got a certain amount of scholarships. We're going to recruit the best players we can.
Right.
And they did that. And part of that was the Alabama influence, because Alabama, the state, doesn't have Georgia's talent base. So they recruited nationally. And so Kirby knew right away he wanted to recruit nationally too. And they were able to build that brand. I mean, I think a lot of it is just hard work, and Kirby put such an emphasis on recruiting. Like Beamer told me stories about hearing from Kirby at middle of the night, getting texts about, we need to look at this guy. Beamer also told a story about, I think it was a ninth grade tight end in Utah that they get film on and they start researching. Like, they really wanted to get to these kids early. And that's when people wonder, what are these big staffs about? What do these people do? These quality control staffers, that's what they do. They find players and then they cut up film for these coaches to evaluate. And it's just having this big staff and these resources that helps Kirby know about these guys. And then they get offers to these guys earlier than other schools, definitely earlier than they were under the Richt era. And that's a big impetus for being able to recruit the way they do.
Was there someone in the book who you wanted to talk to? Obviously, you said Kirby didn't talk about the book specifically, but was there somebody you really wanted to talk to who you weren't able to talk to?
Oh, I mean, I think you'd love to talk to someone like a Sony and Nick, someone like that, a Cheney, a Tucker. But with a football program, there's so many coaches and so many players that, for one thing, I did want to talk to people who were out of it because they're more free to talk.
Right.
And I also knew from covering the team, the guys that I wanted to go to talk. And the ones I targeted, by and large, were the ones I was able to get.
And sometimes, a lot of times, the best players aren't the best quotes. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So,
I mean, I love Nick Chubb, but he wasn't. And actually, Chubb was an underrated good quote, because even though he's not from South Georgia, he had a little bit of that South Georgia quality,
yeah, he did.
Cedartown quality of, I'm not going to say much, but what I say is going to be good.
When I need to say something, I will. That's right.
Yeah.
What about the now? What's next for Georgia, do you think, as they move forward and kind of not that just kind of phase out of what's in the book, really? I mean, as they move forward, what do you think is next for this program?
Well, they're just happy that they're having the 2020 season.
Yeah.
So that's a start. I think the thing that you're seeing with Kirby is that they're always going to be willing to change. During the 2019 season, you saw this criticism, which was valid, about the offense and about being too predictable, too stuck in the old ways, man ball, so to speak, which was, by the way, man ball was a phrase that popularized, but I first saw it on the Get the Picture blog, Blutarski, and then I used it in a story, and then next thing you know, Kirby is saying man ball after the SEC. So Kirby's either reading the blog, Get the Picture, or reading my copy, or both, to reference it. But so people were saying Kirby's got to change the offense, but he's not going to change the offense. He's too set in his ways. He's too stubborn. And I kept telling people, man, I don't think that someone who's that dynamic in everything else he does at Georgia, like with recruiting, the vision for facilities. I've got a lot of stuff in there about his, like the behind the scenes stuff about him pushing for facilities at Georgia and him seeing the need for it. And for staff and everything, that I don't think that someone that dynamic in every other way of life won't be this way about offense. And that was borne out. He didn't ever call a press conference and say, I'm going to make a change at offensive coordinator and change my offense from X to Y. He just did it. He just hired Todd Monken when people didn't expect it. And you're going to see a different offense in 2020. I don't know that it's going to be the air raid, like throwing it up and down the field, like LSU last year or even Bama the last couple of years. But I don't know that it won't either. I think it'll be right now. I mean, Georgia still has some pretty good running backs and a good offensive line,
no
so
doubt.
they're going to use them. But Kirby's a guy who's going to constantly change when he needs to. That's something that emerged. I mean, he's 44 years old. He's my age. He's not someone who's completely set in his ways, and he's someone who, if he had his druthers, would be at Georgia for a long time. But he also doesn't look like 20 years down the line and say, I'm going to be at Georgia this time. He's looking at like tomorrow's practice. He's got that vision ability, and he has Georgia where he wants it to be, where he wanted to be when he got here, and he's just looking to see how he can keep it there. But he realizes that he's always got to be thinking a step ahead in order to do that.
And got to get to the next step too. I mean, that's the thing is winning a national title. And you just answered Nate's question about would he be there for a long time, or does he get the NFL itch? He doesn't seem like an NFL coach to me.
He doesn't seem like it, but he's in. You know, I remember I ran into him when he was in between jobs, when he had been hired as Georgia's head coach, but he was still Alabama's defensive coordinator. I ran into him, and I described this scene in the book on the campus of the hotel that Georgia was staying at, the team hotel in Jacksonville. And he, you know, we had a quick conversation about it, and I said, you're going to be announcing any hirings? And he said, well, I'm not sure if I'd announce it Sunday because the NFL is going on. I don't want to, have it lost in the NFL. And that showed me he has an awareness about like PR,
right?
But also like he knows the NFL is there. I mean, he coached in the NFL for a year.
Yep, that's right.
I think any of these guys are fascinated by the competitive part of it. Like they want to see if they can work in the NFL. But he also saw Nick Saban not like the NFL. I mean, Nick Saban didn't out and out fail in the NFL. He just didn't like it. He left the Dolphins. He could have come back to the Dolphins. He wasn't fired, but he wanted to go back to college because he just didn't like the NFL. He didn't have as much control. That may help Kirby someday think he could go and do the NFL because he'll go into it like with eyes wide open. But I think right now he likes Georgia. He likes recruiting. He likes having the relationships with players that you can have at the college level.
And their parents and all that stuff. I think he enjoys all that stuff. A good question from Andre about was Kirby the I mean, obviously he was the clear favorite to get the job, but did they talk to anybody else, or was it, hey, this is Kirby's job if he wants it?
It was Kirby's job. I mean, there may have been some conversations like on the side or whatever, but he was the choice. One of the factors in firing Mark Richt was to not let Kirby Smart go to South Carolina.
Yeah.
I've always believed that. Talking to people in the book, I have a chapter that leads with Mike Cavan, guy who recruited Herschel. That's why the Herschel mistake is in the book. Sorry again. But Cavan is a key figure at Georgia. He's a backroom dealer and the kind of guy that doesn't want you to know that. But he knew Kirby from back in the day. He has a brother who still lives in Tuscaloosa. I don't know if that's how it was done, but obviously with agents, and Kirby was a Jimmy Sexton guy, things can get done behind the scenes. But people at Georgia were worried that South Carolina was about to hire Kirby. And Tyler Simmons told me when I was working for the AJC and Dog Nation that Kirby told him that Kirby's getting a head coaching job, not the South Carolina job necessarily, but Kirby told him, I'm going to be a head coach in 2016, and wherever I go, I want you to come with me. At the time, Simmons was committed to Alabama, and we all know what ended up happening. Tyler Simmons follows Kirby to Georgia.
And he was onside. He was not
onside. For the replay showed he was onside.
When you look at Kirby, and is he Nick Saban, or is he more like Nick than not? I mean, I haven't been around Nick, so I can't really say.
you know, the thing with Nick is there's also like another side to him that people don't see, the same way there is with Kirby, but they're also different people. I mean, you know, Nick's from West Virginia, is a little bit more north. Kirby's a South Georgia boy, and you know, they're 25 years apart. I think that Kirby studied under Saban, and so he saw what he wanted to take with him, what he wanted to emulate. Another theme about Kirby is that if he weren't a football coach, he'd be a businessman. And a lot of people think he'd be a smart businessman or a successful businessman. And, you know, I'm not sure what Saban would be if he weren't a coach, but he might be a politician. I mean, he's a smart guy too, but again, a successful politician. Or, you know, he might be Tony Fauci person. But Kirby would be a businessman. And they're different in that way. And Kirby's going to put his own spin on things the same way that Jeremy Pruitt's putting his own spin on the Alabama process at Tennessee, and Will Muschamp doing that, did it at Florida, doing it at South Carolina, and Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. Everyone's different. Kirby just gets identified a little bit more with Saban because he was with him for so
long. Yeah. And you know, you've been around him for so long. I mean, there's just so much that I think he still has to do at Georgia that I don't see him leaving anytime soon.
I think, you know, he's happy here.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where he went to school. I mean, it would be the NFL or anywhere. As long as this administration is backing him up and giving him the resources, the kind of things they weren't doing for Mark Richt for most of Richt's 15 years, as long as they're doing that for Kirby, I think he's going to be happy and he's going to stay.
Well, that's great. Well, Seth, I'm really looking forward to reading the book. I haven't read it yet. I'm looking forward to it. I know people will enjoy it. Thanks for doing this, and hope everybody enjoyed it. Thanks for all the questions. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Bill King, send me an email. I'll answer you offline.
That's good service.
Bill's good people. I don't want to not answer his question.
Thank you so much, you two. That was a really fun event for our attendees, and we do hope to post this recording on our YouTube channel once it's edited so that people can continue getting value out of it. One thing I neglected to mention at the beginning of the event was that Seth has made the very generous offer to drop by the store and sign copies of his book. So if you just want a signed copy, just an autograph, or if you would like him to inscribe it to you or a loved one, that would really make it extra valuable for you and or the person that you're buying it from. So if you want, you can order the book from our website and just in the order comments say who you'd like it written out to, and we will reach out to Seth and we can arrange a time for him to come by and sign before we get these books to you. So thank you again, both of you. We really appreciate you sharing your time with us, and to everybody who attended. We really appreciate you being here and shopping with us. It means a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone supports Avid. It's a great place here in Athens.
Thank you so much. Bye, y'all. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Go Dogs.